Hey, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Terry McVanus, the President and CEO of RTCA. Greetings from our nation's capital and welcome to all of you to what is now our 13th in a series of webinars, Aviation Technology Connect. We're pleased to have created this series via this platform to hear from a variety of aviation industry leaders on a broad spectrum of topics that will educate you, further inspire you in your profession, and perhaps even evolve your thinking as to where the industry is today and where it's going in the future. This webinar series continues to be very successful, attracting an international audience of upwards of 400 people tuning in each month, not only from here in the United States, but also from Canada, countries across Europe, the Middle East, South America, Africa, Australia, and New Zealand. We have heard from leaders at the FAA, EASA, NTSB, and others from our aviation industry. And we believe that today's webinar is going to be equally exciting and informative. These previous webinars were recorded, as is this one. So if you want to go back and listen to any of our previous recorded webinars, you can find those recordings on the RTCA YouTube channel. We've been holding these webinars each month, and like today, each of these webinars focuses on a particular topic where you'll gain some insights from industry leaders that I'm confident will be inspirational, strategic, or even thought-provoking, with the primary goal of them giving you, the audience, the gift of their knowledge. And I know many of you watching today are familiar with RTCA, but I do know that we also have some first-time visitors with us. So I want to take just a couple of minutes to familiarize you all with who we are. RTCA is a aviation-centered standards development organization whose mission is to inspire the creation and implementation of integrated performance standards that meet the changing global aviation environment and further ensure the safety, security, and the overall health of the aviation ecosystem. Now, in addition to developing standards, we also provide training to government and industry personnel on the application of those standards and developing the basis for certification and testing. And on the screen, you can see two of our upcoming training events next month. On October 11th through the 14th, we'll be running our new course for this year on safety management systems for new entrants to aviation. And then later in October, our course on DO-160G is being offered. And you can sign up for any of these courses via our website at www.rtca.org. If you are interested or have any questions about our training, our standards development work, or are interested in becoming part of the RTCA family of members, have a voice in developing standards, you can contact us directly through our website or via telephone. Now, our ability to bring you these webinars would not be possible without the generous sponsorships from our industry partners. And today I'm especially thankful to our gold sponsors this year, Collins Aerospace, the National Air Traffic Controllers Association, the Airline Pilots Association International, and Thales. Our corporate sponsor this year is the Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association, and as a webinar sponsor for today's event, we have L3 Harris as a webinar sponsor. Now, we do have some handouts that are available to you from our sponsors, along with all the speaker biographies. And you can access those handouts by downloading them just by clicking on the Documents handout button that's located here on the GoToWebinar platform. So let's get started. This is part 2 in our webinar series focusing on airport infrastructure investments. Now, infrastructure certainly has been very much in the news of late, and this week is no exception given the discussions and the debate that are going on up on Capitol Hill at this very moment. But regardless of what final version of an infrastructure bill the House and the Senate eventually approve and then get signed into law by the President, significant investments are going to be required for airports to address repair and maintenance backlogs, reduce congestion and emissions near airports, and drive electrification and other low carbon technologies. During last month's seminar, we heard from representatives from 2 of the airport associations, 2 technology providers, and the National Association of State Aviation Officials that represent the state government aviation agencies. And this month, we're going to take a more focused probe into airports themselves and look at how investments in infrastructure have to be implemented strategically, methodologically, and address not only today's needs, but also address the future needs of an ever-changing aviation environment. And so to kick things off, I'm again pleased to introduce Ms. Carol Huegel, the moderator for this series of webinars. Carol's currently a principal at Gate to Gate Solutions and is a member of the RTCA's advisory board. Ms. Huegel has spent more than 30 years serving airports, airlines, and air navigation service providers around the globe. Her career has taken her to senior leadership roles at American Airlines, the FAA, Metron Aviation, and the Census Corporation. So Carol, I'll turn things over to you. Good morning.
Thanks very much, Terry. Hello, I'm Carol Huegel, and I have the pleasure of moderating the webinar today. I will join Terry in thanking everyone for joining us. This is the second of two webinars hosted by RTCA with the intent to engage aviation stakeholders and those in other transportation verticals in a thought-provoking dialogue about the technological innovations that are profoundly reshaping the mobility preferences of travelers. And we're going to chat about the impact of that reshaping on airport operations and airport infrastructure investment needs around the globe. With the rise of novel technologies and innovative business models in the aviation, surface transportation, and space verticals, consumers really are anticipating more equitable, more efficient, and environmentally responsible travel experiences. Further, consumers have indicated a strong preference for connected, safe, and affordable travel service when and where they need it, very often now referred to as mobility as a service. As many of you are aware, and Terry just mentioned, in the United States, the Senate has passed a $1 trillion bipartisan infrastructure package. While the House is yet to vote on that bill, it is anticipated that it will eventually make its way to the White House for the president's signature in the not too distant future. The anticipation is that investment will include utilities, electric vehicles and charging stations, improvements in our water systems and electrical grid, climate remediation, and of course, transportation. At the moment, the funding allocation for airport infrastructure is anticipated to be somewhere in the area of $25 billion, with $5 billion anticipated for improvements and modernization of FAA facilities. About $110 billion is expected to go toward roads, highways, bridges, and so on, and $66 billion for Amtrak. So while that $25 billion for airports is certainly appreciated, it's really effectively a down payment on all of the needs of the airports when one considers that prior to the pandemic, there was a backlog of approximately $115 billion in airport infrastructure needs. And now, of course, we have the impact of the pandemic and the impact of this additional investment that's going to be required to meet the emerging mobility needs of the traveling public. So today what we're going to do is we're going to explore a little bit about the airport innovations and what it is that airports anticipate in the next several years. We're going to kick off with a thoughtful discussion about the meaning of airport infrastructure. Each of our panelists is going to talk about the meaning of airport infrastructure to themselves and their organizations and the priorities over the next 5 years, 10 years, and beyond. We're then going to transition over to these emerging technologies. We're going to talk a little bit about how does AI, Internet of Things, data digitization, robotics, and so forth impact the airport's ability to improve efficiencies, increase capacity without pouring additional concrete. We're also going to talk a little bit about electric vehicles and the impact of those vehicles and the infrastructure needed to support those at an airport. We're also going to touch a little bit on the concepts of intermodal, multimodal mobility as a service. I'm certain you're going to find that quite interesting. And then, of course, we're going to talk about environmental sustainability with a real focus on sustainable aviation fuels. And then we're going to wrap up with a dialogue about resiliency. So what can airports do to be more resilient in anticipation of future disruptions? Certainly 9/11, the pandemic have really left a strong mark with regard to preparedness for future disruptions. So now what I would like to do is introduce you to our absolutely outstanding panel. As Terry alluded to, we've got a little bit more of a focused panel this time, and I will introduce them to you in alphabetical order. So first, panelists, if you could go ahead and switch on your cameras. Okay, great. So first we have Martin Boyer. Martin is Vice President and Chief Information Officer at the Greater Toronto Airports Authority. Then we have Tony Chapman. Tony is Director, Industry Affairs, Alliances, and Strategic Initiatives in the Airport Systems portfolio at Collins Aerospace. Tony is also a member of the Corridor Consortium, which is a new consortium whose mission is to define the framework for multimodal transportation systems, and specifically looking at the creation of a safe and flexible framework for the passengers and transport operators. Pretty exciting stuff. Then we have Ian Redhead, who is Deputy Operations and Maintenance and COO at Kansas City International Airport. Ian also wears another hat. He is the airport representative and current chairperson for the FAA REDAC Environmental and Energy Subcommittee. And then we have Michelle Schwartz, and she is the Chief Corporate Strategy and Affairs Officer at Los Angeles World Airports. So a big welcome to all of our panelists. Really looking forward to your sharing of your expertise today and your perspectives. So before we get started, just a quick note, we are going to take questions. You can send in a question by clicking on the question mark on your displays. And we're going to have Terry kind of moderate the question and answer session. And we will do that at the end of the panel discussion. So again, click on your question mark and send in a question. Okay. So we're going to start with the meaning of the words airport infrastructure, and then the corollary to that, as I mentioned, is the first 5 years, 10 years, and beyond in terms of priorities. So Martin, how about if you kick us off?
Okay, thank you, Carol. Maybe I'll try to bring a different perspective to it. That when we're talking about the airport infrastructure, we can relate to concrete, to buildings, but it could also be related to the digital infrastructure that you need to run an airport. And this digital infrastructure allows to the entire ecosystem to work together. The various agencies, the airlines, the airport, NAV Canada in our case, the navigation systems. And this infrastructure, in terms of its ramification, is way broader than the physical footprint of the terminal. And to this effect, and we'll talk to you about it a bit later, we have started to work with some other airports in Canada to see how can we work collaboratively together in order to enhance our capability to deliver this infrastructure.
And Martin, do you want to share a little bit about your priorities when you look at the next near term and longer term?
Yes, I would say that obviously the contrary to the state in Canada, the airports or authorities are non-for-profit organizations. So we are financing our own infrastructure program through debt holder. And you just say that, and we didn't have any help from the government throughout the pandemic. So we accumulate a huge debt that we will have to deal with, but more importantly, that's going to force us to be very creative the way that we're going to satisfy our need in the future. And this is where we feel that investing in technology to enhance the various flows in the airport could be more efficient than pouring more concrete and expanding the footprint. So we're going to try to limit this construction expansion to the minimum and being as efficient as we can through the investment in technology.
Thank you, Martin. Tony, would you like to give your perspective?
Yeah, just picking up from what Martin has just said, I think it's twofold. There is a certain amount of physical infrastructure that's required. You know, for example, how are we going to optimize the passenger transit through the airport with self-service machines, self-service devices, a bag drop and boarding gates and the like. That requires physical change to the interior of the airport, not necessarily pouring construction, but change. But then it's also about sharing of the data between the various service providers, the passenger, to optimize that experience. So that gets the passenger through the airport. But then what do we need to do to make sure that the actual turn of the aircraft is optimized? I know we're going to talk about environmental later on, but the last thing we want to do is, you know, get passengers through for them to just sit on an aircraft because there's no taxi clearance, for example, which drives the environmental consideration. So I think it's twofold. One is, what is the minimum infrastructure we need to optimize the passenger experience and give them the facility they are demanding, given that the world is going mobile? And then how do we share all that data, and what data do we need to be sharing, not only necessarily within the airport, but across airports? You know, a departure is an arrival somewhere else, so that data needs to be shared between the city pairs and more globally than that.
Thank you, Tony. Ian?
So, you know, both of those distinguished panelists have already touched on some of the points that I'm going to touch on. So if you ask an operational type guy, the first thing he's going to tell you is runways and taxiways, because if you want to grow and be able to grow aviation, you have to be able to accommodate, as Tony said, the airplanes coming in and out of your system. So that's one would probably be one of the primary things that I would look at. The second thing would then be your facilities, your terminals, your garages, your roadways, because you have to be able to get passengers in and out, and you have to be able to have the facilities to be able to accommodate the passengers that you're dealing with. And when you start talking about facilities, you have to actually look at your demographics and the passengers that you're handling. In some cases, you may have people who are starting to be more mature in terms of, depending whether you're on origination and destination type market. So now you have to make sure, you know, accessibility and all of those things are key issues that you address. The third one then would be, I think, is available land. In order to be able to keep growing and have your partners be able to become more successful, if they want to add capacity, you have to be able to have land. And Michelle is going to talk about the value of having land and being able to use land, or how creative you can be to use existing land in order to be able to continue the growth of your airport. In terms of future, in Kansas City, we're currently going through a program whereby we are building a brand new facility, which will have 39 gates and a lot of new technology, and it will replace facilities that are currently in excess of 40 years old. We're building a brand new garage and associated roadways. And as Carol, you mentioned earlier on, you know, we are fortunate in that we had this program starting before the pandemic, but there are a lot of other airports that have had to postpone their capital programs because of the pandemic and because of budget concerns and things like that, similar to what Martin mentioned. So we're going through this, and we will have this new facility opened in the first quarter of 2023. So that has different challenges when you start taking into consideration, okay, what's the lessons you've learned in trying to run an existing facility for years, and how do you make sure that you don't repeat those errors when you're building a new facility, and how do you plan for the future passengers, like you said, you know, access, mobility, technology in your new facility.
Thank you, Ian. And over to you, Michelle, last but not least.
Thanks so much, Carol. So, you know, for me, when I think about infrastructure, I think about all the things that have been mentioned, but think about it in terms of our mission at Los Angeles World Airports, which is to deliver world-class airports. And anytime that we talk about world-class airports, our local city council member hastens to add, well, we want a world-class airport and a first-class neighbor. And so for us, a lot of times I think about the infrastructure that we're developing encompassing, yes, all of the things that we're building at the airport, but really what we're trying to build more broadly in our community and in our surrounding communities. And I'm happy to speak more to that as we go on. So as we're looking out at the next 5 to 10 years, we have what I think is an extraordinarily ambitious plan, our capital improvement program. So we can go to the next slide. So at Los Angeles World Airports, for those who don't know, we operate both LAX and Van Nuys General Aviation Airport, but I'll be focusing here on a lot of what we're doing at LAX. So we're in the midst of a $14.5 billion capital improvement program, and that is reimagining every aspect of our airport. And so we're renovating and modernizing every single terminal. We've already opened 2 new facilities this year. We will be opening 2 more before the year is through. And the centerpiece of our capital improvement program is our landside access modernization program, which is $5.5 billion. And as you can see here, we are building an automated people mover train that will have 6 stations and be a 10-minute ride end to end, which anybody who's ever tried to drive into LAX knows that that will be a vast improvement. It also includes a consolidated rental car facility that will be the largest in the world when it's completed, as well as an intermodal transportation facility, a 4,300 stall parking structure that we will be opening next month. And so that will be the first component to open. And we can go to the next slide. And so here you can see those 3 major components of our landside access modernization program. So as I mentioned, this intermodal transportation facility opening next month, the consolidated rental car facility that is going to be opening in 2023, and our automated people mover train, which will also be opening in 2023. And I'm going to kind of, because I'm in my office and you can see this, I'm going to take you all and show you what this looks like. So I'll turn this around because you can see outside my office, that is where we are building the train. So you can see it coming to life before your eyes. We have about 75% of the guideway already built. And so now I'm back and we can go to the next slide. We are not content to rest on our laurels with $14.5 billion. And so we are already, and really what we're doing with that $14.5 billion, and especially the landside access, is a lot of pent up demand and the projects that we probably should have done 20 years ago. So we don't want to get caught behind again. And so we're currently in the final stages of environmental clearance for our next $6 to $8 billion of development, which we call our Airfield and Terminal Modernization Project. This is a suite of projects that includes a new Concourse 0, a new Terminal 9, airfield safety improvements, and a new elevated roadway system that will deconflict neighborhood traffic from airport traffic. And so, and going back to what Ian said, all of this is happening within our existing footprint, which is quite small and bordered on 3 sides by vibrant communities and on the 4th side by the ocean. And if we go to the next slide, you can see the elements of this project. And so these are some renderings of what this will look like. So, and this is slated to all be completed by 2028, when Los Angeles will welcome the world for the Olympic and Paralympic Games in the summer of 2028. So happy to stop there and move on to the next questions, but we've got a lot going on here.
Thank you very much, Michelle. The view outside the window must be very, very motivating each and every day. Okay, so thanks to all of the panelists for those opening remarks. Really pretty powerful stuff. So we'd like to now transition into a discussion about some of these technological innovations. And we're going to specifically have Martin and Tony walk us through some of the innovations that are available today and in the future, and how the airports can capitalize on those innovations. So Martin, why don't we start with you, and then we'll go over to Tony.
Thank you. If you're looking at an airport, just from a process standpoint, there's fundamentally 3 processes that you must align: the aircraft movement, baggage movement, and passenger movement. The passenger movement is clearly the one that have been the most disrupted by the COVID-19 pandemic. Now all the airlines have to deal with the health passport and how to implement it. And right now the industry is extremely segmented, which is really a problem for the automation aspect to it. Let's say from Canada, if you want to fly to the States, there's probably a different requirement that if you want to fly to France, Greece, or Italy, and those requirements often are changing every day. So this presently a challenge within the industry. But as the industry is converging toward the solution, to me, the implementation of a health passport is going to be the key to enhance the efficiency of all those processes. And this will be supported by technology such as biometrics, which is not new in itself. The challenge of implementing a biometric technology is controlling the flow of information between the various stakeholders. And this is where the difficulty is, and this is where the attention is right now. But when we'll be successful, I think that the solution to this pandemic, or what's going to come out of it in terms of new process, is going to be based on biometric technology, the way that you handle this, the galley or the information, and how do you handle internationally this health passport. To me, that's the key of the success. On the baggage and on the aircraft movement and some other technologies that can be applied. I'm going to just give you an example in terms of the baggage technology. For all of you that are familiar with the manual encoding position in the baggage room, we're starting to develop a solution where the manual encoding position can be dealt with through camera system, which means that the operator doesn't have to be physically in the baggage room. As soon as you're successful to do that, then this opens a slew of opportunities. If the manual encoder doesn't have to be in the baggage room, it can be into another country, into another city. You can start to consolidate a baggage encoding operation for multiple airports, and then get efficiency and economies of scale. And this is where we're heading right now. So I think that the three processes, there's a lot of opportunities, but just to summarize, the one that to me needs to be leveraged and enhanced right now, resulting of COVID-19, is really the passenger processing.
Thank you, Martin. Tony? Tony, you're muted.
Apologies. As Martin said, I think biometrics are the key to the future, but more than that, I think it's the mobile use of biometrics and the self-sovereign capability. So I enroll as myself, and then I choose to share that enrollment with whomever I choose to do so. It's not controlled by the airline, the airport, or anybody else. It's under my control. And I don't have to send a biometric to any other system. I just use it on my mobile. And I think some of the solutions we're seeing that are to solve the COVID requirement are leading us down that path already. They're forcing us to pick up that thread sooner than we might otherwise have done. So that gives the passenger total control. They can elect to share that enrollment wherever they choose to do so and with whomever they do. And that, to some extent, I'm not saying, I'm not belittling it, but answers some of the privacy questions. If it's on my phone under my control, then I don't have to worry about sending a biometric to some other third-party system. I'm just sending the information that lies behind that and proving at that touch point I am who I claim to be. So I think that is key. The baggage, we know that, we're fortunate we can move around. We've got, legs and we can speak to people. A bag can't. So there's always going to be a position where you're going to have to get rid of that bag. And how do we do that so safely, securely, and efficiently? Again, mobile solutions, we've been used to printed bag tags for the last 25, 30 years, whatever it is. The use of permanent bag tags, electronic bag tags. So again, I can encode them with my mobile and then drop the bag. And the system then takes care of everything else. Why do I have to worry about sticking a sticky piece of paper on my bag to dispatch it? So I think those are two key areas. And then following on from that, the technology, we talked about improving the actual turn of the aircraft. What can we do with systems that will, using AI maybe to enhance the turn operation, do the stand planning more efficiently than might be the case at the moment? And again, some of the concepts that were put in place for COVID, how do we separate aircraft at that time? But then that leads on to how can we make the turns much more efficient in that process. So I think there's three threads there, the passenger, the bag, and the airport operation.
Thank you, Tony. Michelle, could I ask you to share a little bit about some of the vision that you all have out at in LA for bags in the future in terms of drop points and so forth?
Absolutely. Thank you for that question, Carol. So, we definitely envision having an experience where people are able to check in their bags remotely and away from the terminals. So we're looking at initially starting that with our intermodal transportation facility as well as our consolidated rental car facility. And so that's something that we're hopeful that we'll be able to do. And that will be important for convenience for the passengers, but also to free up capacity on our automated people mover train so that people are not taking up that capacity with their baggage. We also, the dream is that, as in some airports in Asia, that we would be able to actually have people, check their bags from their hotel in downtown Los Angeles or from other locations. There will be issues of security. There will be issues of how do you actually get the bags through Los Angeles traffic to get to the airport and meet the passenger there. So those will be challenges as well. But that's something that, as we look to the future, that we really think is going to be incredibly important to the guest experience.
Thanks for that. Okay, so Ian, how about if you talk to us a little bit about electric vehicles and what that might mean to the airports? And I know you have some information to share about what you're doing in Kansas City.
All right, there you go. So one of the things of being fortunate enough to be building a new facility is that you can put in certain infrastructure that in some cases it would be very expensive to retrofit facilities to accommodate something such as electrification of vehicles. So in our new facility, one of the things we did in partnership with the airlines is we have agreed to have, when we open the facility, a certain percentage of the ground service equipment being electrified. Not only is that good for them in terms of their costs, but it's also good for us in terms of being good environmental neighbors to the people in the communities in and around us. You're only going to be able to do that when you're building new infrastructure. The other thing that we've done is that we have added electric buses to our fleet. And one of the additional things when we're building new capabilities for the new terminal is we could actually put in what are called inductive chargers in the ground where the passengers are being picked up. So while the passengers are getting on the buses, we can actually charge the batteries on the buses that will extend the life of the buses in terms of how long they can run. Here again, we're reducing our reliance on fossil fuels and so forth, which actually will enhance the experience. And as Tony said, the experience being on an electric bus is very different because they are very quiet. People can actually talk to each other. Parents can yell at their kids and make sure they behave themselves. Even the drivers, when they're driving, when they first started operating on the buses, they were a little hesitant because you're waiting for this gear to kick in, and the bus, you don't really get that experience at all. And they're a lot easier. And then from a maintenance standpoint, we can reduce our overall costs, obviously for us at the aviation, but overall for the airlines and everybody who pays for things at the airport, because our maintenance costs will go down because you don't have as many moving parts with an electric bus as you may have with some of the other types of buses, whether it's CNG or diesel or whatever. So it has an overall win-win benefit for everybody. And as you said earlier, Carol, there's a bigger interest right now in reducing carbon emissions and so forth, and the current administration is putting more money into electrification and all of these other programs. So I think you'll see a lot of airports taking advantage of these things. Our city managers put out an edict that any of the vehicles that we're purchasing for the city departments, so we should also look at the electric vehicles. So overall, I think it's a good thing, and it's a good way to invest in the future of the environment.
Thank you, Ian. So we've talked a little bit here about some of the emerging technologies and the innovations that are really sparking a pretty exciting time actually for the consumers. But we also now want to just deep dive a little bit into the infrastructure that's going to be needed to support all of these great innovations and to actually make them a reality. So if I could ask Michelle to talk a little bit about infrastructure and some of the opportunities that you see for airports and aviation when we look at this impending legislation. And then as well, it would be terrific to hear from others on that point.
Sure, thanks, Carol. So, now I get into my comfort zone, having spent most of my career in Washington and on Capitol Hill. So, really, for us, looking at an infrastructure legislation and, both the bipartisan infrastructure legislation that's going to be voted on tomorrow, the $1+ trillion there, and also the, yet to be determined, but currently $3.5 trillion reconciliation legislation, we're looking at all of the opportunities for airports to build out our infrastructure to take advantage. And so, there is the $25 billion for airports specifically. That's part of the bipartisan infrastructure deal. That's very important. We are, incredibly excited about that. We're happy that, that seems to be definitely one of the consensus points that everybody agrees that we need to invest in airport infrastructure. And that part of that is also $5 billion of that is a competitive pot, and so that's really going to be looking towards, what are those projects that have a national impact. So that's really good to see as well. And also a recognition in that legislation that, that the projects that need to be eligible for that funding and go beyond, what's going on the airfield in terms of runways, what would typically be eligible under the airport improvement program, and looking at, what are those projects that are creating access, that are where you're having the terminal projects and so on, that are, having a broader view of what airport infrastructure is. But for us, we want to look beyond, we want to look beyond the money that's earmarked for airports and see what are the other opportunities that are there. So, building off of what Ian was just talking about with electric vehicles, which is also a huge priority for us at LAX, where we're going to be adding 1,200 EV charging stations over the next couple of years, in addition to our already all-electric airfield bus fleet, and our goal is to get to 100% electric for our light-duty vehicles and our buses. So that's one area that we really see as an opportunity, that there's funding in the reconciliation bill for electric vehicles. That's a very big priority for the administration, for the Biden administration. And so for us, we say, well, that's money that should be up for grabs for airports as well. And so we've been working to make sure that the language there, that the eligibility is clear, that airports will be eligible for that as well, that we're going to be part of this, broader integrated infrastructure system in the country, and that airports aren't just kind of standalone. So that's just one example of where we're seeing other opportunities in infrastructure legislation for us to build all the things that we need.
Thank you. So Martin, can you give your perspective? Obviously, the funding paradigm in Canada is a little bit different. Can you share with the team your views on how it's different, and your approach to the infrastructure side that's needed to support the implementation of the technology? You're on mute.
My deepest apology. But as I mentioned earlier, all the airports of Canada are a private corporation, non-for-profit corporation, where we have to raise our own capital through debt holder, essentially. So once comes the time to invest for this kind of infrastructure, is being done through leveraging the various corporations. And that's why, given what's happening with COVID, we have to be more efficient than ever in order to to invest. So first of all, there's one thing that we're doing in multiple cases, more and more when it's possible, we're doing it with the other Canadian airports together. I'll give you an example. We're in the process of replacing all our cups and cups environment. So all the kiosks and that process a customer in the terminal, as well as a check-in and the gate environment. But instead of going an RFP alone, so as Toronto, where we're still a pretty decent sized airport with 50 million passengers prior to COVID a year, we elected to go with Montreal Airport, Calgary, and Edmonton Airport. So now we're 4 airports going out for tenders, and now virtually we're becoming a 100 million passenger airport. So obviously we're attracting a lot of attention in the marketplace, and we hope for that 2 things. First of all, to drive economies of scale in terms of in front of the vendors, because obviously we got a lot of vendors' attention, which is such of a large request for proposal. But more importantly, also for the Canadian airport system, we are expecting and hoping to get consistencies. And for the airlines, that's music to their ears. So if you have the same passenger processing system to all the key airports in Canada, you can see from the WestJet or the Air Canada of this world, or even the American carriers coming in Canada, then you have consistency. And this consistency will help us to get efficiency. And that's one of the things that we are doing in order to achieve this. And we're doing that in more and more in multiple areas where wherever we can pool and consolidate with our other airports, we're doing it.
Sounds like it's going to be a very productive approach to the RFP. So thanks to Michelle and Martin for sharing that. So now we're going to transition into intermodal, multimodal, and I'd like Tony, if you wouldn't mind, to kick that discussion off for us and share a little bit about what you're doing with the consortium.
Yeah, so thanks, Carol. As you mentioned earlier, I think eCorridor is the European research project looking at intermodal travel and how can you use the same booking and the same biometrics to transfer from in the first instance from rail to air back to rail again, and how do you transfer that token securely, safely, seamlessly with the requisite information that both rail and aircraft require. So that brings into all sorts of facets of biometrics, what biometrics technology is. A lot of partners looking at alternatives, FACE is the de facto standard at the moment, but what other standards could be there to enhance the rail? We know we can use it in air travel, but how do we use it in rail? And they want to look at even such obscure things such as hand gestures. Apparently that is unique. And how do you complement the facial recognition by using hand gestures? And can you optimize the passenger experience by effectively being able to see somebody as they walk up to a particular point rather than just waiting for their face to be captured? And then how do we transfer that data between the different parties in the different formats that they currently require, bearing in mind that systems are very different between air and rail. So that's the research project is about that. It's a couple of year project, so it's research. It's not delivering a workable solution necessarily. Points of trial and proofs of concept in that period. So it's exciting because we see rail, and we've long talked about intermodal travel, and what can we do? Many parts of Europe, airports in Europe and the Far East have more direct connections to rail from airports, more so than a number of US airports. But talk about infrastructure. The infrastructure, I think, as Michelle said, doesn't stop at the front door of the airport. It's how do you get to and from the airport? And we've all traveled through not only LAX, but other major US airports where it takes you as long to get to the front door as it does to get you to the final destination in many cases, especially in adverse weather and everything else. And how do we optimize that? And we do need to think about rail connections straight into airports and have that seamless journey. I know we talk about seamless journey as maybe it's the airport experience, but the seamless journey starts from your home, hotel, wherever you want to start your journey from, and when you arrive at your final destination, hotel or home or wherever that happens to be. So that's what we need to be looking at, and optimizing not just the on-airport experience, but the to and from airport as well.
It feels like not so long ago when we used the expression curb to curb in aviation, we were talking about from the departure airport curb to the arrival airport curb, and the consumer sees that very differently now. It literally is from a city center to all the way to the hotel at the other end of the journey. Michelle, on the note of intermodal, can you share a little bit more detail about, I know you showed us the facility and what that's envisioned to be, and you shared a little bit about your goal with being able to check bags off airport. Can you share a little bit more detail about, do you have it set up as a phased implementation? As Tony touched on it, it feels like there are a lot of standards that need to be discussed. Interoperability pops into one's head. So if you could just share a little bit in terms of LAX specifically, that would be great.
Sure. So one thing that I did not mention is that our automated people mover train, this will be delivering our very long awaited connection to the regional rail system. So there will be one of the stations on the train will be a connection to LA Metro, which is building a new Crenshaw line. There will be an airport metro connector station that will connect those two so that people are able to get from and to and from LAX and to Union Station in downtown Los Angeles, out to Santa Monica, out to different areas throughout. And this is all really part of a larger vision where there have been ballot initiatives in Los Angeles that have added sales tax in order to build out our public transit system. So this will all be integrated. We also at LAX, we operate different systems such as our flyaway bus service, which historically has been a point-to-point bus service going to Union Station, going to Van Nuys. And so we will continue those popular services, but we have an RFP out right now that's really reimagining the flyaway service. So having elements of it, which would be microtransit, where you're able to really go to where the demand is at that moment. Having technology be much more integrated so that people are able to use these services, again, what everybody has been talking about, from the palm of their hand, operate everything in a self-service way, and be able to really plan out their whole journey. We also recently launched our transportation management organization, which is for all of the employers at LAX. So of course, our own workforce for LAWA, we're a little over 3,000 people, but if you add in all of the badge holders, we're up to 40, 50,000 people. And so bringing in all of those and identifying, what can we do in the ways of van pools, what can we do in the way of getting more people onto public transit. And so really looking at this in a holistic way that brings us in more closely to what's going on regionally with the transportation system.
Thanks, Michelle. So I'd like to now touch on environmental sustainability. And Ian, if I could ask you to kick off that discussion, that'd be terrific.
Sure. I think there's a lot of efforts in terms of sustainability that have been going on in aviation for many, many years, and people may not be aware of it. The FAA, in partnership with universities, NASA, other federal organizations, the engine manufacturers, the aircraft manufacturers, and so forth, have been designing and increasing the efficiency of aircraft, of the engines and so forth, so that they are quieter and they emit less emissions. When you look at noise contours around airports, when I first got into this business, the noise contours were, and in many cases, were outside of the actual property boundaries of airports. Nowadays, most of the noise contours are actually within the property boundaries, and that's because of technological advances within the aircraft themselves. They're quieter. We've gotten rid of the older aircraft that were a lot more noisy, so that people who live in communities off the end of runways or in close proximity to an airport don't really experience the noise like they did. One of the other initiatives that's been going on for a few years is this idea of sustainable fuels, and what some people call SAFs, or drop-in fuels. There's been a lot of investment, not only from the federal government, but from airlines, from corporate airplane manufacturers, even from foreign governments, Canada, and even other ones, British interests in these sustainable aviation fuels. And what basically it is to get the development of fuels that are not fossil fuels that can be manufactured and they can be put directly into and mixed with existing fuels, and that's why they call them drop-ins. And that has been actually going on for a number of years, and it's actually, they are producing these types of fuels. And you know, people such as United is one of the key airlines that have been talking about using sustainable fuels, but their Gulfstream is another one in terms of their aircraft. But a lot of these engine manufacturers and stuff, and a lot of everybody globally have looked at reducing carbon emissions and so forth from an international standpoint. And the ability to grow the sustainable fuel market to the point where it is now cost competitive with fossil fuels is actually the key goal. And hopefully with some of this environmental money, you're going to see additional growth in this market. A lot of people don't realize there's actually a big industry that keeps growing every year in terms of production of this type of fuel, and it's certified, and a lot of countries are using the technology here that has been approved in the US to certify these other fuels for use overseas, as opposed to trying to figure out how to do it themselves. The US is leading in this effort. So I think there's a lot of things being done, and some people may not be aware of it, to try and make sure that the environment is actually a better place long term, just to be able to allow aviation growth and not harm the environment.
Thanks, Ian. Martin, would you like to add on to the sustainability dialogue relative to Canada? You're muted.
I guess I should learn better. So the situation is quite similar in Canada than in the States. So in the interest of time, I would say that what the people on the panel just have mentioned, it's exactly the same thing that is happening in Canada.
Okay. So I noted here that we did not touch on the human dimension of infrastructure. So we are getting toward the end of our time, but would any of the panelists like to comment on the human infrastructure dimension?
I'll take a cue from Martin and make it very short. That's one of the things that keeps me up at night. And as Michelle has pointed out, as Tony has pointed out, we are putting more and more technology into our systems and into our airports and so forth. And therefore, we are now going to require a new type of employee to be able to work and manage these new systems that we're putting into the airport. And that keeps me up at night, trying to make sure that I can find the right people to. Now you have to be able to look at the computer and diagnose things from the computer and then react, as opposed to the older days where, now we're going to have work order systems that go directly to people's iPads or iPhones or whatever device they have when somebody has a problem, and they can pull it up on their computer and see what the problem is, and then they have to react, as opposed to people walking to different locations. Having people who are more technologically savvy as people get older, meaning current workers get older, and making sure we're bringing in the right people is something that is a major concern for me, especially since I'm opening a new facility in 2023.
Ian, would you like to share with the participants the sort of the data that you shared with the panel about the results of your recent job fair?
Oh, that's really scary, and I think everybody's seen this all.
Share it.
Yeah, it's kind of scary, and I think people are realizing this all over the world, not only here. But we recently had a job fair, and we were looking for multiple people in multiple departments, and I think we had a total of 50 people that showed up for jobs. And I think a lot of people, not only concessionaires, people in the airlines, other airports, restaurants that you're going to can't open fully because they can't get servers, all of these things. And that's a big concern right now, because everybody's trying to get back and recover from COVID, but it's taking a really long time in order to try and somehow fill a lot of these positions that when people went away trying to get them back into the airport. When I first came here about 15 years ago, we had a job fair. We had to move cars out of the parking lot. We had so many people waiting to try and get jobs. Now it was like, okay, we were really disappointed.
Thanks for sharing that, Ian. Michelle, did you want to?
I just want to brag on my team for a little bit, for a moment, because I will say, so we had heard these horror stories from other airports across the country, but we held a hiring fair just a few weeks ago, and we were lucky enough. Thankfully we partnered with the brand new SoFi Stadium in Inglewood, which will be hosting the Super Bowl in February, so that we had a very large venue, because we actually had more than 3,000 job seekers who showed up for that hiring fair. And I think that, it was a testament. We had more than 50 employers who were there to hire for a very large number of jobs. And so I think that, we got a very good amount of coverage ahead of time, and also had really strong partnerships with city, state, and regional workforce development agencies, as well as with some nonprofit partners that we worked with to really get the word out and get people out. And so there were a lot of offers that were made on the spot there that day. So we're excited, and that's really part of, for us, build the capacity building that we take to heart in programs like our Higher LAX Apprenticeship Readiness Program, which is a partnership with our local building and construction trades, where we have trained, well upwards of 200 people to get into construction careers. And so they're out there building the projects that you can see out my window, and as well as the capacity building that we're doing for local businesses. So I think we also got lucky with our hiring fair in terms of our timing. We held it just as supplemental unemployment benefits were running out, and we also, at the airport, because we have very strong worker protections like our living wage ordinance. I think that, where people might be more hesitant to go and work at a restaurant or something like that, they know that, these are really good jobs at the airport. So proud of what we're doing there, although, we still have a long way to go as well.
Thanks, Michelle. Thanks, Ian. So Terry, do you have some questions for the panel?
I do. I want to make sure we have some time to answer several of the questions that have come in. So I'll start, and I'm going to paraphrase most of the questions, put my own personal spin on them, if you will. But our moderator for the panel, Carol, I've heard her say before, when you've seen one airport, you've seen one airport. So as you think about infrastructure capabilities and changes going forward, how do you work together so that there's some harmonization or standardization between the various airports, so that both the customer experience as well as the, shall we say, even the role of the employees as part of the delivery, there's some standardization amongst airports and the infrastructure surrounding them?
Anybody want to start that?
I think Terry, I think where you actually see that is when you have the, I think you said you had two of the trade associations that represent airports on in one of the other panels, and they have different committees that address, whether it's IT technology, whether it's infrastructure, and all of these different types of things. And I know in Canada you have a similar organization, the CAA. And that's where you will find a lot of the exchange between professionals, such as Michelle, myself, Martin, and Tony, talking about projects that they're doing, and you also have a lot of the consultants there at the same time, and you try to learn from different people different airports when they've done certain projects to see what works, and we rely to a large degree. We may have a vision. We rely to a large degree on the consulting partners and to try and make sure that vision works. And as Martin has said, there's more connectivity in some of the airports and so forth. But you have to think about, if every airport only had one app, you would have 465 certificated airports in the US. And if you traveled internationally, then you'd have to add all of those other apps. I don't think my iPhone would be able to hold all of those apps. So trying to make sure that there's connectivity between the types of systems that are put into airports and as Tony said about bag tags and all these things, trying to get harmonization about how everybody, what type of bag tag, RFID tags, or different types of things that people use. It has taken a while, and it's still hasn't been finalized totally, as if I understand it properly. But we're all still trying to move in that general direction so that it would make it easier for the passengers to use our facilities.
Yeah, I think as Martin mentioned at the start, just the digital health credentials and certificates. You know, I don't know how many apps there are out there now, but why would I need a different app if I'm flying to Heathrow compared to flying to Frankfurt, for example? And just understanding that's not good for the customer. That's not good for the passenger. One trusted source of information through one route is what they need. And I think that you can then follow that corollary further down the value chain.
I think that most of the solution that we have to implement in the airport, we have to recognize they got to be industry solution. They cannot be airport specific. Otherwise, we're going to end up going in the wrong path. And that's why, as an airport, you have to be plugged into all those panels, all those association, IATA, ACI, and so forth. So you're very active influence, and you understand what's coming down the pipeline, because that's where you have to anchor your technological direction. You cannot be alone in your world.
I do want to point out, I think that, and it's agreeing, but also kind of having a little bit of a twist on it. So absolutely with cooperation, with coordination, you know, one thing that we are a part of at LAX is also an airport benchmarking group that is 9 leading airports around the world, where we've been sharing best practices for years. And I think that, you know, for that group, but really for all of us, I think that COVID has been a time that has really strengthened the ties within our industry and also with other industry partners. But I think, you know, so the little twist that I'll put on what everybody has said is that I think that it's really important for there to be standards that are set, that there are, you know, different roles. I think that there's a role for government as well in setting standards, but that you don't want to be so prescriptive that it removes the opportunity for innovation. So we've really, in a lot of different contexts, urged that, you know, the government set standards and then really allow those innovations to proliferate so that you get to the best result, because we all know that, you know, if you choose one, it's not always the best, and sometimes, you know, that can kind of stifle there from being further innovation.
Kind of related to this, in terms of the international aspect of that harmonization and standards, is there a role, or have you worked with ICAO in helping to harmonize things?
Well, I would go back to the development of the drop-in fuels and stuff, and that the role of the FAA at ICAO in developing the standards, as Michelle says, has helped guide the research and facilitate the development of these things in one particular direction as opposed to multiple directions, so that investment could be made with a focus as opposed to just everybody going out in their own way. And then, you know, it's the same thing as Martin has said, when the number of their key airports pool together their resources to go out for bid, it's the same thing. If you get governments and or industry pooling money in a particular direction and going after research and developing the research along a certain path, you're seeing results a lot quicker as opposed to people going in multiple directions. So I think the role of ICAO and all of these different industries is vital in terms of getting everybody to try and play well on the same playing field, and to use resources smartly.
So to me, you have to be in the middle of the action. As an example, my 2 key chief architects are heading some subcommittee of IATA when it's pertains to passenger processing. That's how you know what's happening, and you know how you can influence it also. And to me, that's critical that we're plugged in all those subcommittees to see where the direction is going and influence it.
And to make sure that your airports are in the same step, because you definitely don't want to be using technology that is not going in a particular direction. So I'll give you a good example. Many years ago, they were talking about biometrics in passports, and for a lot of it, it was the fingerprint. Well, now there's a lot more in terms of facial recognition that Customs is pushing as the exact biometric that they want to positively identify an individual. And I know TSA is also looking at it in that particular way. So there was a transition over time from fingerprint technology now to facial recognition technology in biometrics.
I think that was driven, as you say, by ICAO standards. What do you have to have on a passport? You have to have a face. You can have a finger as well, or you can have an iris, but you must have a face. So right. that drives that standardization. And
goes back to Tony, to what you were saying in terms of these medical IDs, and Mike Martin saying the same thing. There's so many people are not agreeing, countries are not agreeing, and how are we going to transfer this information so that people can just move between countries?
Yeah, exactly. I think we're in the worst place, aren't we, here in North America?
So yesterday,
by not having a digital form of the vaccine record, how do you share that?
Yesterday, the FAA administrator and the NASA administrator had a joint webinar on airport infrastructure and some of the things that the FAA and NASA are doing, how they're collaborating together on the future. How can the airports better plug into what's going on at the governmental level and taking what they're doing and get it implemented into future airport infrastructure?
Well, since I'm plugged into the governmental level because of my involvement on RTCA, I think we, to a large degree, as was indicated earlier, our involvement in the associations and the committees that we have, brings us together as a group. I think we have to rely a lot more on the trade associations to be plugged in at the governmental level, because we would be spread really thin if we try to get our people all over the place in too many different directions at once. I think we rely, like, IATA, Airlines for America, all of the A4A and all of these cargo associations and everybody to have their people in Washington, like when Michelle was there, to work with their constituents, which are the airports or the airlines, and make sure that their voice is heard at the DC level, and that information is then being brought back so that they are conveying, as Carol said, that when you see one airport, you see one airport. Therefore, you can't be prescriptive in saying this is the only way that things can be done. As Michelle says, you have to have flexibility. What is the goal? What are you trying to accomplish? If you have the goal and you allow people to use their own knowledge and experiences to get to that point, the ultimate goal is we get to that point. There may be different ways to get to the final outcome, but if you all accomplish the same outcome, then we've all succeeded.
I think also, for us, a lot of it's been just raising our hands a lot, and making it very clear to our government partners that we want to pilot anything that they will send our way, and we've had a lot of success with that. So, particularly with the Transportation Security Administration, I have every opportunity to say that we have at LAX the best TSA in the country, feel very strongly about that. We have the best federal security director, and they just have, they lean in a lot on innovation, as we do, and so we've been able to pilot a lot of different technologies with them, and I think we go out of our way to make it as easy for them as possible to do that, and so then they keep coming back to us with more. We're very excited that we're going to be the second counter UAS test site for TSA, and so that's something that we've been working with them closely on getting ready to launch here in the coming months. We also, just all different kinds of technologies. So, we're the first airport to have the CAT technology at every single checkpoint. So everybody, being able to insert their own ID into the machine and having that be contactless. So, a lot of biometric pilots here as well. So I think a lot of it has really been just, making it very clear to our government partners that any new technology they want to throw our way, we are ready for it and we want to work with them.
So I was having a conversation with one of our members earlier this morning, and his company is in the advanced air mobility space. And he was telling me that a simple thing like charging stations for their electrical powered vehicles is going to be a problem because some of their competitors have created their own type of charging station. And, his comment was, my guess is theirs isn't going to be compatible with ours. So as from an airport perspective, what do you see, your role in helping guide the aviation, especially some of the new entrants, where it comes to these standards that are going to be these commonalities, these standards are going to be so important, so that there is the ability to, it doesn't matter what type of vehicle you have, that you can utilize that, say, and this is just an example, but use that charging station, for example.
Well, since Michelle is putting in a lot more than I am, I'm going to see how she answers that question first.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's already, it's a challenge already for the electric vehicles, which don't necessarily have standardized, and then, as we're expanding to having, eVTOLs and other kinds of technologies, I'm sure that will proliferate. I mean, I think that's another area where we're going to have to work more broadly. I mean, I think that, the airports will have a role, but as we are looking at, for example, with advanced air mobility within Los Angeles, of course, it's a role for the airports, but we also are working very closely. We are a department of the city of Los Angeles, and so we are working with, our fellow departments in the city. So, Los Angeles Department of Transportation. There's a partnership right now with Urban Movement Labs that our mayor entered into, and so where they're really looking at urban air mobility, how they're going to educate the general public on it, work with industry, and build a model for local policies on UAM and on AAM. And so I think that that's something as well that we as airports, we can work together, but we can't do this alone. We need to be working more broadly with other government partners, because these are going to be aircraft that are not only taking off and landing at airports, but they're going to be all over. And so I think that it's going to have to be a broader partnership to get to that point.
So Terry, I recently spoke at a zero emissions conference, and one of the things I told them is there was a predominance of electric buses. I said, if you think of an airport as a city, we have a lot more other vehicles than just buses. So you need to start thinking about all these other vehicles that our police drive, or traffic enforcement officers drive, or maintenance people may drive, like even such things as mowers and all of these other types of vehicles to maintain all of the facilities. And if you really want to expand your business, start thinking outside the box, because we're not just buses.
Well, unfortunately, we are out of time. I really hate to cut off the conversation because this is great, and I know we have a few other questions here too, but we'll certainly get those out to all of you and get the answers back to the folks. But thank you so much. Fabulous discussion. Carol, Ian, Martin, Michelle, Tony, thank you. It was great, and I'm sure we'll be talking some more on this subject in the future. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Everybody stay safe.
Bye.
So before concluding today's webinar, we have a video we'd like to show you from our new sponsor, Thales. So let's go ahead and run that video. Well, this concludes today's webinar. Again, my sincere appreciation to Ms. Carol Huegel from Gate to Gate Solutions, Mr. Ian Redhead from the Kansas City International Airport, Ms. Michelle Schwartz from Los Angeles World Airports, Mr. Martin Boyer from the Greater Toronto Airport Authority, and Mr. Tony Chapman from Collins Aerospace. Thank you all for your valuable participation this afternoon. And again, thank you to our sponsors for today's webinar, Collins Aerospace, the National Air Traffic Controllers Association, the Airline Pilots Association International, Thales, the Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association, and L3 Harris. And for the audience, thank you for joining us today. I hope you found today's presentation educational, inspiring, and evolving. Again, these webinars are being recorded, so if you want to review anything presented today or any of our past webinars, you can do so by going to the RTCA YouTube channel. Next month, we're going to switch topics, and we're going to be talking about unmanned aerial systems, or UAS, and what it's going to take to get routine operations into controlled airspace. Our moderator for our next webinar will be Mr. Brandon Suarez from the General Atomics Aeronautical Systems Company, who also serves as co-chair of our Special Committee 228 on UAS standards. So we look forward to seeing you next month at our webinar. It will be held on October 20th, again at 1:00 p.m. Eastern Time. Thank you again for being with us, and have a great day.